Gentrification. Some of us hate it, some of us love it. We've seen the benefit of it from some neighborhoods getting stuff cleaned up. However, for some of us, it's been bad because we've been displaced from the places that where we grew up at. It became very unaffordable. But I'm gonna go through some numbers with you to hopefully shed some light upon some of the pluses and minuses when it comes to gentrification and give you my own thoughts and opinions of how I really feel about it. This is really primarily based on Brooklyn because that's where I've seen it the most. I grew up in that neighborhood and I've seen where it impacted so many people around then. So in 2010, the population of Brooklyn was 2.5 million. In 2020, that number went to 2.7 million, and in 2022 it went to 2.6. So there wasn't a huge influx of population that grew Brooklyn. It seems to be pretty flat actually, growing around the 2.5 to 2.7 million. It's not a huge increase of population because when I look at it, I'm like, what other space does it have to actually contain a lot much more people? It may feel that way having foot on the ground. It really felt like that. However, looking at these numbers, it doesn't seem that way. Homelessness is another thing I want you to account for, and this is from usafacts.org. In December 2022, 68,000 people were reported inside of homeless shelters, and about a third of them were children, which is pretty sad. I did not know that there was such a huge population of children that were homeless. And in March 2013, 48,000 of the population were homeless and 20,000 were pretty much children. So we could see over the course of this 9-year span, it's been a 40% increase of homelessness inside of New York City. This is not just accounting for Brooklyn, but the entire city quite a bit. The city now, I think, has over 8 million people, and that's counting for all the 5 boroughs. And Brooklyn is only 2.5 million of the population to account for that. But still, the homelessness is not as drastic as I think it is. However, it is still bad. For you to have close to 100,000 now, it's pretty sad to see that. Income has not really grown as much, and we've seen that across the board across many cities. So in 2010, the median household income was 54,000 and change, and in 2021, that number only grew to 67,000. So 13,000 over the course of 11 years. But if we look at it, the percentage, that is roughly about 26%, I would say 25%, which is not that good because things have gotten a lot more expensive. And the way we can tell is by the cost of rent. So in 2006, the cost of rent was a little over $1,200, right, in 2006. And in 2021, that number went to $1,700, which is almost 40%. So we've seen right there, right, 40 to 45%. The cost of living just for you to rent versus the increase of income is not the same. But I'm going to share some light in terms of how you can keep up if you see that your salary is not growing as much and you see things are getting more and more expensive. And how has the demographic has changed inside of Brooklyn, because that's what really affects the gentrification. And by the looks of this right now, in 2010, about a third of the population there was white. 22% was black, 12% was Asian, and 28% was Hispanic. In 2021, 36% was white. So we see that there was an increase in the white population. In terms of the black, there was also an increase in the black population. The Asian stayed pretty much the same, 12%. The Hispanics has declined. It went from 28% to now 19% of the population inside of Brooklyn that were Hispanic. So there is a slight side of gentrification right there, but we can't blame the white folks that has overpopulated the area and just take over everything. We've seen the increase, but obviously there's been a more increase of black folks living in Brooklyn more than any of the other races that we're seeing here. And in terms of like new constructions, new buildings, I have some data from 2010 to 2020. There were an increase of 78,000 units built, which is a mix, right? It could be big buildings, it could be multifamily, single family homes, but there were 78,000, which is quite a bit. But in spite of all this, the thing that really affects gentrification is pretty much the levels of income that are really coming in. Because if the people that are coming in have a much more capability to afford more things, it's gonna make the neighborhood more expensive. Because what happens is they start shopping for a home here, and they're willing to pay more or go through a bidding war and pay over asking price for a home. Boom. So now you got this one house, and then the next person sees that, they're like, oh, so you paid this much? The appraiser that's appraising this next house now is appraising it at a higher value because they've seen that house has increased more. Therefore, they're going to ask more for their homes. And it creates this whole domino effect, which is how we see home prices appreciate over time, because the next person is always asking for more. Unless something drastic happens to the neighborhood, the city, like Detroit, where we've seen where plants and factories shut down and people are no longer interested in an area, then we'll see a decline, a huge decline of home prices come down. And there's also economic factors too, like when we seen the 2008 financial crisis. By 2010, a lot of home prices have pretty much plummeted across the board. But looking at Brooklyn here, it seems like, yes, income is not increasing as fast as rent. There's definitely been an uptrend of development. They've actually done more development than all the other 4 boroughs that's inside of New York City. So there's Manhattan, Queens, Staten Island, and Bronx. And Brooklyn outpaced, according to this data, from 2010 to 2020. But how I really feel about this is, one, if you see that your salaries is definitely not going to appreciate as much more, because companies are just not going to do that. But one way you can upkeep is make sure that you're investing continuously. So if you are able to set aside a good portion of your income on a yearly basis, put it towards the stock market, definitely you'll be outpacing a lot of these numbers. Like, I can tell you right now, like if you just did the basic SP 500 ETF index funds and didn't really buy and sell stocks like that, and you took a good portion of your income and actually allocated to do that, you would have outpaced this 45% across this 5-year mark that I'm looking at from 2006 to 2021. With this 45% increase, would have outpaced this increase, because it does about 12% per year. And if you multiply that by 5, and let's say we're not compounding interest, right? That's like 60%. If we are compounding interest, it's actually even more than that. So this is one way you can actually upkeep if you see that your salary is not increasing, but the cost of living is. And that's how you can kind of adapt to the whole situation. Having foot on the ground side of Brooklyn, I've seen a lot of parks got renovated. The streets got cleaned up, a lot of places. The thing too is, a lot of my folks, when I'm talking about my folks, I mean other black folks, African American, we complain a lot about so many things, but we were not the ones to actually make the change in a lot of these neighborhoods. We let them plummet. We weren't cleaning up these streets and doing things, but when somebody else steps in now, starts doing that thing, and because they're cleaning all this stuff up, of course they deserve to have an increase in appreciation of the things that they're investing in. And in fact, because of that, now it's all cleaned up. Things deserve to be appreciated a lot much more. So now you cannot be upset because you let it sit there and you didn't do nothing while you had the opportunity to be able to actually have that appreciation yourselves. If we had that shift in mentality and be able to actually put time aside and clean up our own neighborhoods, a lot of this would not happen. Another thing too, a lot of us ran to the money. Like, as soon as we seen a couple of dollars, we didn't think about the long-term vision. We just ran to the money. A cash buy comes through with the luggage and suitcase, be like, here, I give you this pot of money for $500,000. In Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, a lot of that happened. And now these prices for these brownstones are like $1.5 million, $2 million plus, going to even $3 million at sometimes I'm seeing, which is insane. But these things, back in 2010, you could have got a property over there for probably like $100-something thousand. But we let a lot of this go very cheap. We weren't thinking about the long term. We just saw the money and ran to it and not thinking about the long term vision, versus another group of people coming and stepping in. And I'm not going to break down these group of people by demographics, because it has been a mix. As we can see by the data here, it's not just the white folks like many people may think. It's definitely a mix of people that came in and actually brought up and appreciated the neighborhood. You can do something about it as well. Make sure you're not selling things for that you're not just running to the money either. Don't just sell your property out because you see a pile of cash somebody just throw in front of your face. Think about the long-term vision. There's other ways around. You could do a cash refinance where you take some of the equity, buy other properties, and be able to elevate, and then you fix up your side of the property. And we could have all done this as well as a group and be able to build that commonwealth. But it starts here. The mentality starts here. So don't complain and sit there and be like, oh man, the changes in price in neighborhoods. Do something about it. You could have purchased around the time instead of being like, oh, I'm just gonna rent and don't worry about this whole landlord stuff at all. These are opportunities that we're allowing and we're giving to other people for them to step in and be like, I'm gonna seize this since you did not take it. So we can't sit there and complain all about it. Don't get me wrong, there's a level of greed that some of these investors have. It's insane and it makes it really bad. One of the reasons I came to Jersey is because of the fact that the cost for me to do an acquisition and also rent it out, it did not make sense. The math did not plan out properly versus coming to Jersey. It made a lot much more sense where the cost and income for rental that I would be able to get, it worked out perfectly with my personal income and such. So some of the things you got to factor in is that as well. I remember one person I came across, they were talking about buying back Harlem. Well, you already sold Harlem for a cheap price. Why would you buy it at a premium? That does not make any sense to me. It's like buying an Apple stock at $170 per share when you could have got in at $30 per share, but instead you sold at $30 and you're now trying to buy it back at $170 per share. That doesn't make sense. You buy high and sell low? No, you sell high and you buy low. So when the neighborhood is not up to par and everything, you come right into it, then yeah, you step in. And then when it appreciates and it comes up, then you sell. That's the other factor to go about it. But instead of selling, trigger the tax event, I was encouraged to do one, either cash out refinance or do a HELOC where you pretty much take the equity of the home as a loan for you to do another acquisition elsewhere, so that way you don't trigger a tax event. There's just so many ways for you to build wealth and be able to grow the economy, build your generational wealth for your future kids and grandkids and so forth and so forth. Another thing that I want to look at is the business sales increase. This is one of the benefits I saw from gentrification, is that from 2009 to 2016, we're in 2023, and I'm looking at a 7-year span, and this is a 7-year-old data, right? It increased by 48% within that 7-year period. And remember, 2008 was when the crash happened. 2009, things were not so great either, but it increased by 48% to a record of $13.6 billion in sales inside of Brooklyn. That is great because it shows that there is a fluctuation of money moving around. The government hates when money is just standing still, but if the economy is just flowing through, people are spending and doing things, things are growing, it brings a benefit. So that's the other side of it that a lot of people don't look at, is this is what helps elevate the economy and actually grow things. Of course, I know it could be upsetting, but seize the opportunity. Do not sleep, because while you are sleeping and being like, oh, I'm just going to rent, all this, somebody else is going to seize the opportunity in front of you. And therefore, while they're benefiting from the gentrification, you are not. However, if you did acquire property, when it does happen, like I'm seeing my parents' home, which went from 380 when things were really bad in Crown Heights, to the point where it's like they're getting offers for $2 to $2.5 million. Or after like about 20 years, they've benefited from that whole appreciation of gentrification. So this is when it's not bad. And if they were to dip out, which I wouldn't say now because the housing market is so tough right now for you to sell, to me it doesn't make sense, but it still adds value. You benefited from the whole property appreciating and all these things happening. So I hope you take this into account. Don't complain. Do something about it. And if you cannot capitalize on an opportunity that's inside of your neighborhood, seek another neighborhood that's probably nearby. Do your own research, do your due diligence, speak to your financial advisor, see what you can afford, and try to make things happen for you. So hope you found this insightful. Don't hate gentrification. There's pluses and minuses to it. Peace and love. Trust in Jesus. Have an amazing one. Like, share, subscribe, of course. And if there's any questions you have for me, drop it in the comments below. Peace. Hustle, hustle, hustle.